Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This is part 2 in a series about all of the dimensions, how that relates to the reality that we're currently experiencing, what it means with regards of going to the 5D, all of those wonderful things. So it's been a challenge for me to pull all this together, but I feel compelled to share this. I feel like it's an important step. The content is going to be important to helping people reach a new level of consciousness by remembering who we all really are. So in part 1, we started at the 0 point. We went back, if you remember, to talking about what we learned in grade school geometry about the first through the third dimensions. And then we talked all the way up through the 6th dimension, which is where the higher self resides. So if you want more details on that, please go back and watch part 1. But I do want to reiterate a few key things to remember as we continue in this second video. So the first thing I want to reiterate is the nature of the dimensions, right? We talked about how dimensions are not places. They are ways of perceiving a complete and total reality that already exists. So we talked about how when people say that time doesn't exist, what they mean is time only exists when you're perceiving things from this 4th dimension. Anything below the 4th dimension or above the 4th dimension, you're no longer perceiving time space in the same way. So that's going to be key to remember. All of this already exists. It is complete, meaning every potentiality has already occurred. And there is a such thing as time, but it's only a tool that we use in the 4th dimension to perceive the passage of time, because it's helpful, or we found it helpful, obviously, to explore these lives that we're experiencing right now. So again, go back to part 1 to get more details on that, but that's going to be important to remember for this second video as well. And what we're going to talk about today is the 6th through the 10th dimension. Now, if you remember from the first video, I mentioned that this shape is actually a torus, T-O-R-U-S, for those of you who want to Google that and understand what that looks like. This is a 2D version of that I've drawn here. If you've seen the movie, and I mentioned this in part 1, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and you remember that the villain or the antagonist, supposed antagonist, really just the dark feminine, was about to jump back into that donut shaped, or they called it the everything bagel, torus. And that was a representation of the all. So she saw all of this as meaningless and painful. And the whole objective of the movie was to bring her back to remembering that all of this was created because of love, right? And what is love? Love is acceptance. Love is perceiving all parts of something and accepting it for what it is. So we talked about how we are 4th dimensional beings, and we currently are existing here because we intended to, because this is a place where we can perceive space-time, and it provides a unique opportunity to learn certain soul lessons. So this is a sacred place. So reiterating a third point, that all of us who are talking about going to the 5th dimension, you don't actually go to the 5th dimension because you are already there. You are already existing in some form. You're just perceiving yourself differently in all of these dimensions. Now, just to drive that home, I'm using my same little tool that I used in part 1, but this is a 3D object. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Does this nail file, this 3D nail file, exist in the 3rd dimension? And you're going to say, yes, it's a 3-dimensional object. Does it exist in the 2nd dimension? Why, yes, I can see it as a 2-dimensional object by the way that I'm looking at it as well. Does it exist in the 1st dimension, and does it have all the infinite 0 points? The answer to all those questions is yes. It is made up of the 0 points, the infinite 0 points, the 1st dimension, 2nd dimension, and 3rd dimension. And the way that we are perceiving it in this form is from the 4th dimension, because we're in time space, as a 3-dimensional object. Let's remember that. So we talked about how at the 4th dimension, what you have is all these different timelines being created by the movement through space-time of all these 3D objects. So what you have at the fifth dimension is all of these 5D objects, which are timelines. Now, you can think of these just like you think of 3D objects. Like if you look around the room, you see all these 3D objects just sitting, right? Because they're not able to move themselves through time space. We, living beings that are operating fourth dimensionally can pick those objects up and move them around, but they can't move themselves. Similarly, we, existing in this fourth dimension, cannot move ourselves through all these potential timelines that can be perceived in a fifth dimensional way. We can imagine these timelines and in a way communicate with our higher self, but only the part of us that exists in the sixth dimension can manipulate or move around these timelines. And if you were to think of timelines, if you look at this stick, it's my son's toy that I'm using to point here. Let's just imagine timelines were 3D objects and I had an infinite number of these potential timelines, right? Everything's already happened. If we can imagine it, it exists within this torus. But imagine that they are 3D objects. Your higher self has the ability to manipulate these 5D objects, which are timelines. You, as a fourth dimensional being, cannot directly manipulate these timelines. What you can do is through your imagination and vibration, communicate your desire for one of these timelines that you're imagining, one of these sequences of events. And your higher self has the ability to manipulate these timelines. So what is the sixth dimension? The sixth dimension is where the part of you exists that is able to influence and change your 4D experience. And that is how you manifest. So if that's what's happening at the sixth dimension, we talked also about these bold lines. This is where we make major jumps. So the first major jump for anything that exists in reality, including human beings, is to combine this masculine first dimension with the feminine second dimension, and then it moves on out into physical reality, right? Well, when we get up, so that was the first jump from the unborn, unseen to the born into the 3D. The second jump is up to this higher self where we have this ability to jump timelines. And then the seventh dimension is where new universes emerge. So here you're jumping timelines. Here you have new universes with the same origin point, right? With the same kind of rules or starting points. And so you can see an example of this illustrated in TV and film with the Marvel Universe. Now they can pretty much do whatever they want. And that's how it is from this level of perception of reality, right? You can make combinations from similar origin points for any scenario that you can imagine. The eighth dimension is new origin points. So if you look carefully at the number 8, and numbers are the one universal thing, the number 8 looks like an infinity, which means there are an infinite number of origin points for universes. So for each origin point, there's an infinite number of potential universes, meaning, combinations of timelines and happenings. And then an infinite number of timelines because you're creating them as you make your decisions and you focus your attention. An infinite number of fourth dimensional experiences that can be had. An infinite number of modifications of a similar physical reality. So we're going up and down, up and down. And like I said, this is all about perception. This is an eye. It looks like an eyeball. And it's the all-seeing eye. So all these ways of perceiving were created for us to be able to have these experiences for the purpose of exploration of the self. Another important thing that I had to insert here is the significance of the numbers 3, 6, and 9. If you want a deep dive on that, I recommend you Google the numbers 3, 6, 9 and Nikola Tesla and what he believed about their significance. I also recommend that you Google how the 3, the 6, and the 9 operate completely differently from all of the other numbers that we have in a number system. I said all that also to point out that right here, where the 3 is where we explode out into physical reality. So this inner circle here is where the imperceivable exists. This big section here from the 3 to the 6 is the physical reality, right? Including all the timelines. And this space here between the 6 and the 9 is the whole of the higher self. Beyond the 9, when we get beyond infinity, is where our perception stops. This is where we can't imagine anything beyond this. This is the whole of this particular reality. So the 3, the 6, the 9 are very significant jumping points in this construct of reality. Before the 3 represents the imperceivable, between 3 and 6 represents the physical experience, 6 to 9 represents the higher self. Beyond the 9, you're back to 0, basically. It says 10, but it's really back to 0. So I thought it was important to highlight that and further draw attention to how unique this 3, this 6, and this 9 really are. So there's all these new universes that can come from the same origin point. And when you get to the new origin point, you have an infinite number of universes, the multiverse. Then there's another bolded line here, which represents another jump, which is to the 9th dimension, where you have the potential for entirely new laws of physics. So new origin points, right? So even using the word physics here is something that's contained within this particular reality. Because if you go outside of the 9, outside of this bold line, that's where you have the 10, which is also the 0, if you remember that torus shape, where the mind is, the collective consciousness, where all of us come together as one consciousness. We are one consciousness, and decide how we're going to break ourselves down in order to perceive ourselves. So go back and listen to that 9 or 10 times. It's taken me decades to conceptualize this. So again, you have this major jump point at the 3, this major jump point at the 6, this major jump point at the 9, and beyond the 9 is the edge of what we can even conceive of. So if we go back to the example of that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, we see examples of this. I highly recommend that you watch that and you come back and look at this. But you'll see that as they travel through all of these multiverses, there are all these different laws of physics. So in one universe, they're rocks. In another universe, they're, paint. And you see this also in, what's the one Marvel movie? Doctor Strange, when the girl America can go to any universe and any time. You see that all these new laws of physics originate right here at the 9. And this represents the border of what can be conceptualized in our imaginations, right? We exist here as well. Outside of this is where we come up with a whole new way of perceiving ourselves that you and I, as part of this particular reality in the 4th dimension, can't even conceive of. And there's an infinite number of ideas about how to perceive itself from dark matter and dark energy. So at level 10 and level 0, we're all one consciousness. When we're coming down to the 9, we break down these different laws of physics, right? When we come down to the 8, we have origin points, right? So we have these laws. We have the origin point of how this particular planet, for example, started. We go down another level. And from each origin point, you have a different universe. So we have the multiverse here. And here, within these universes, within these multiverses, this is where we start to break out into soul groups, soul families, and our higher self comes into play. And as we come down further, we're individuals in the fourth dimension. So we're breaking ourselves out smaller and smaller. If you were to think of an analogy, look at the human body, right? So you look at my body. I'm a black woman, right? You see the outside. You see that I have eyes. You see that I've been designed a certain way. That is kind of like this idea that happens here on the very rim of the reality. That's the body that you can see. Inside are the laws of how things operate together, right? So you say, okay, well, inside this human body, we've decided we want a way that blood flows through the body. We've decided that blood is going to be the life force. So how does it pump? Okay, we need a heart. We need lungs. We want air to come in and out because this is a duality that we're creating with this human body. We want air in, out. And that's the process we go through. So it starts from the outside in. We go all the way down until we get to the cellular level. So that's an analogy of how this would look in a human body. So this whole thing is the body, right? But depending on what you're looking at, whether you cut the body open, which organ you're looking at, which body process that organ is responsible for, all the way down to the different types of cells and DNA at this level, you're looking at a body, but just from different perspectives. And that's how this reality that we're in works. Our bodies are a reflection, or they reflect the same patterns as the reality that we've decided to construct for the purpose of exploration. And if you study anything, and I mean anything, if you study engineering, if you study physics, if you study music, if you study astrology, if you study language, if you study, feminine energy, masculine energy, whatever you study, the patterns are going to be exactly the same. It just repeats. And anyone who's ever studied mathematics knows that there's lots of repetition. Everything builds on itself. You learn the basics. It gets more and more complicated until you reach an edge and you never reach the finish line. There are still mathematical concepts and theories being discovered to this day, and it will never end. That in and of itself mirrors the nature of this reality that we live in. So this is the high level explanation of what's going on here. If you look down in the corner of my board here, I don't know if you can see it well, but my daughter helped me think of this in a different way, right? So if we look at the 10 and the 0, where the whole concept of all of this is kind of created, it's just an idea. All of this is an idea, and then it mirrors itself all the way down to its smallest elements. This is where the idea is born. Within the idea, there's infinite possible laws of physics that we come up with. And for each of the infinite laws of physics, set of laws of physics that we come up with, there's an infinite number of origin points where a reality or an experience can start. And for each of those infinite origin points, there's an infinite number of universes that can be born of that. And for each of those infinite universes, you see it's all broken out here. There's an infinite ways to jump timelines. There's an infinite number of timelines that can be created. And underneath each of those infinite timelines, there's infinite ways or infinite fourth dimensional experiences that can take place, which are controlled by us, guided by us in partnership with our higher self. And there's an infinite number of physical realities, infinite number of two-dimensional realities, and one-dimensional realities. So it just explodes out into a never-ending playground of possibility. When we remember this, we intentionally come here to the fourth dimension to forget this. For, like I said, the purpose of exploration, to see what we would do if confined to a very small set of circumstances. But every time we remember the whole of ourselves, it makes life more playful. You can't get it wrong. A lot of people are triggered by that, especially people who have adopted religion. Religion is just another form of exploration. Religion also mirrors a lot of this if you look at it closely. And I'm not saying that you should remove emotion from it, because a lot of what religion pushes is these emotional and fear-based commitments that you make not to explore. But if you release that and allow yourself to explore, you'll see all of this mirrored in all the different religions as well. I'm most familiar with Christianity. And so in one of my upcoming videos, I'm going to break down how Genesis talks about this creation, the creation of this reality, and how it reflects what I'm talking about here. But if you look at any of the spiritual practices, you will find, if you look deeply, this mirrored once again. I'm also going to talk about how the planetary energies reflect each of the dimensions as well, and how masculinity and femininity play into each of the dimensions too. So this particular reality that our collective consciousness has created is a duality-based reality. So when we talk about laws of physics, that is within the context of duality. And when I'm talking about duality, I'm not just talking about 0-1, male, female, hot, cold. If you think about how this reality is constructed, everything from the light spectrum, which the light spectrum is actually everything. The light spectrum is the ingredient from which everything else is made. Light is information. It's not just something that shines, and we're going to talk about that as well. But everything is on a spectrum. So when you have hot and cold, which are two sides, duality, everything in between is on the spectrum. When you have even 0-1, there's an infinite number of decimal points from 0-1. When you have male, female, and this is very controversial, and it's something that it took me a long time to understand because I was raised Christian, but even on the male, female duality, there is a spectrum. There are people that exist that are somewhere between male and female. And hormonally, we all have varying levels of different types of hormones that instruct the body to operate as masculine or feminine. So everything in this reality, colors, light, heat, even if you look at the periodic table for chemistry, when you're looking at each of those different identified chemicals or whatever elements, they are just the same element vibrating at different frequencies along a spectrum. Anything you study will show you this if you remove fear and you actually look into it. So that is the conclusion of the high level description. Everything that I discuss from here on out, I'm going to reference this, but this is the framework from which you can understand everything in our reality. This changes my perspective on absolutely everything. When I can step back and remember this, and I often naturally will rubber band pop back into my fourth dimensional experience and all of my biases and all of my experiences, and I'll forget this, which is the point. But when I can step back and look at this, it helps me solve any challenge that I'm facing. When I remember that I have access to all the different possibilities, all the different potentialities, all the different dark matter, dark energy, as long as I can remember the parts of me that exist beyond this fourth dimension and understand how to connect with those, there is no challenge I can't overcome. And let's say that I make a choice that ends my fourth dimensional experience. By the way, the only way to exit the fourth dimension is without your physical body. The physical body does not exist beyond the fourth dimension. There's an astral body that you can connect to, and then beyond that, those are things I'm still exploring. But I do know from having an NDE, near death experience, your physical body does not go into the fifth dimension. You're perceiving a completely different part of reality here. The physical body is created here and gets to move about the fourth dimension. If you want to go, you can't take this physical body to the fifth dimension. You can take your consciousness, your perception to the fifth dimension. You can access the part of you, the part of your consciousness that exists beyond the fourth dimension. But all of the different experiences that you have in time, space are contained in the fourth dimension. But remember, we talked about how there's an infinite number of experiences that you can have. So a lot of people, when they talk about going to the 5D, they're really talking about going to a more favorable timeline within the 4D, which is very possible. And it's also possible to be experiencing a certain reality in the 4D as a 3D physical body, witnessing other people have a completely different experience and be on a completely different timeline. This has happened to me personally. I think it's a new level of consciousness that we've reached as a collective, because I don't remember that being the case before, but I've personally experienced being on a higher timeline, but still being able to witness and observe other people's experiences on completely different timelines. I think you have to have a certain level of consciousness to be able to handle that without losing your mind. But it is possible once you allow your consciousness to expand, once you allow yourself to remember and perceive the parts of you that exist in these higher dimensions. So I'm going to leave it there for now. Please leave comments below, because a lot of the things that I talk about, I want to be centered around the things that you all are curious about. I have a lot of things that I think are really cool that I'm going to dig into, and some of them I mentioned, but leave your comments below if there's something specific you want me to talk about, or if there's something that you want me to dive deeper on within the content that I've already shared.